The CDC is a really great resource for finding information and guidelines in terms of how to write effectively for the web. The CDC itself produces a lot of really effective web-based content. And again, it's just a really great resource in terms of understanding how to effectively communicate information online and through the web. So the CDC has what's called the CDC Clear Communications Index. It provides a set of research-based criteria to develop and assess public communication products. It was developed to identify the most important communication characteristics that enhance clarity and aid understanding of public messages and material. The second reason it was developed was to help provide a research-based tool for staff to develop and assess communication products for CDC's audiences, no matter what the format or the distribution channel. So this index is really helpful and can be used in a number of different ways. So first, it can be used to inform the design and the development of a new communication product. 2, to assess the clarity of a communication product prior to its public release. 3, to foster discussion and collaboration between writers and reviewers before or during the clearance process as you work to attain scientific accuracy and clarity of content. And lastly, it's used to quickly assess the clarity and ease of use of an already released communication product. So how can we use this index to develop really clear and effective web-based materials? So the first way we can use this index is to help develop and assess the main message and the call to action for our materials. So you want to ask yourself, does the material contain one main message statement? Remember, when you're writing for the web, you don't want to have a bunch of different ideas in one web page. You need your writing to be really clear, concise, and to the point. And so you want to make sure that there really is, one main message that you're trying to communicate. The second piece of this is thinking about where that main message is being communicated. Is the main message at the top, the beginning, or front of the material? You want to think about where this is. And as we've talked about previously, your main message should be communicated really at the top, that front part, that first part of your web page. Number 3 is the main message emphasized with visual cues. Remember, we need to use visual cues to engage our target audience, to make sure that we have things that are visually appealing and have visual cues that are really supporting whatever our main message is. They're not distracting the reader from that main message, but they're actually supporting the communication of that main message. Number 4, does the material contain at least one visual cue that supports or, conveys that main message? And 5, does the material include one or more calls to action for the primary audience? So you want to have, whatever your main message is, but you also want to make sure that you have a very clear call to action that you want your audience to engage in, right? So if you're trying to talk about how effective COVID-19 vaccines are on your webpage, you want to make sure that you leave that person with information on, what exactly it is that they should do. What is the call to action that they should engage in based on the main message you're trying to communicate, and where can that person go to get a free COVID vaccine? The next thing we want to think about in terms of the index and creating web-based materials is our language. So, do both the main message and the call to action use the active voice? Remember, we talked about using the active voice in a previous video and how important that is in communicating a very clear and concise message to your reader. It often will use less words and text when you're using the active voice versus the passive voice. And so we always want to make sure we're using the active voice to communicate information. 7, does the material always use words the primary audience uses? You want to make sure that you're creating material that your primary audience, your target audience is going to understand. It's language that they would use themselves. It's conversational, right? So you want to make sure you're not writing in large scientific terms that your target audience who's reading your content on the web has no idea what those words mean. You want it to reflect kind of the same words that they would use in their conversations. The next piece of the index and web-based materials is the information design component. So you want to think about and ask yourself, does the material use bulleted or numbered lists? Remember, when you're creating web-based material, people who are looking for information on the web, they want to skim those pages really quickly. They want to find the answer to their question really, really quickly. They don't want to be reading through large paragraphs and large amounts of text in order to find an answer to their question. Remember, if they can't find it, they're going to go somewhere else. So, you really need to use a material that has bulleted or numbered lists, which makes it really easy for that reader. It makes it easy for them to kind of skim down the page and see what content is on there. Number 9 is the material organized in chunks with headings. Remember, it's one thing to have things in bulleted lists, but you want to make sure that those are organized in very specific sections that go together and they're separated with headings. Those headings should be meaningful in terms of telling your reader what it is that's going to come and the information within that section. So you want to have meaningful headings that are used to communicate the information within each section, and you want to chunk your information into different sections instead of having one large paragraph. That would be very difficult to navigate. And number 10 is the most important information the primary audience needs summarized in the first paragraph or section, right? We want to make sure that, that most important information, that key message that we're trying to communicate, whatever that is, we want that at the top of our web page. We don't want that buried down in the bottom. Your reader may not get to that piece of information. So you want that in the top. So that's one of the first things that your reader sees on your web-based materials. There are also some recommendations for fonts when you're creating web-based materials. There's a lot of really fancy, kind of pretty fonts out there. Those might be great for, invitations to social events, but they're not good for your website. So, you want to make sure that you're using font that is really easy for your audience, for your reader to read, that's visually appealing and makes it easy for them to skim the text on your page. More specifically, sans serif fonts, so things like Arial, Verdana, are generally considered more legible than serif fonts, so things like Times New Roman, narrow fonts, or decorative fonts. Decorative fonts, as I mentioned, can be really nice looking, but they're not good for your website and you should not be using them. If you absolutely need to use some sort of decorative or, narrow font, it should be reserved for headlines and decorative text only. But again, I highly recommend avoiding those kinds of things. So you might not be familiar with the terms sans serif or serif font, so I want to make sure that you understand exactly what these are. So sans serif fonts are the preferred fonts. What we mean by sans serif font is that the strokes do not extend out from the top or the bottom of the letter form. So, you'll see in these examples, Arial, Helvetica, Verdana, Lucida Grande, you see that the strokes on these fonts, they don't extend kind of out from the top or the bottom of the actual letters. And so, these fonts are really easy to kind of skim because of the formation of that text, which makes them, really ideal for writing for the web. Now, serif fonts are slightly different. The strokes actually extend out from the top and or bottom of the letter form. So you can see for things like, Georgia, Times New Roman, Palatino, you see how you have, for example, this G here, the strokes extend out from the actual letters. This T, you've got, kind of this shape that extends out from the T. And it's very different from the text that is sans serif. This kind of text gets to be a little more difficult to kind of skim through and should really be avoided for your web-based materials. So we talked about, in the previous videos, how to write effectively for the web. I just covered the CDC Index and how those, components in there can be really helpful in effectively writing for the web. So in the next step that I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the following website. And I want you to look at, how this website follows effective practices for web-based material. So review that. Take some notes and, identify the ways in which this website provides information in a way that follows those best practices for writing for the web.